And we're live.
The European Green Deal is EU's key growth strategy to transition the EU economy to a sustainable economic model. It has the official intention to develop the EU into a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy. Launched in 2019, it includes a number of measures that we'll hear more about today, and it aims to cut emissions while securing a competitive economy. At the same time, Norway, as an EU EEA country, has not been a direct part of negotiating these policy developments. Yet, Norway is heavily influenced by these and relates to EU policies that come in a variation of packages of directives, regulations, support funds, strategies, and other policies. As the main market for Norwegian exports, the EU internal market is crucial. Given the current policy trajectories and developments in Norway, and against the geopolitical backdrop, we'll use the next hour to explore questions on policy developments and interactions between EU and Norway. My name is Tor Håkon Jackson Inneberg, and I would like to welcome you all to this webinar on Europe's green transition, Norway's role, promises, and challenges. I work as a research professor at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute and lead parts of the research center FME Include, which co-organizes this webinar together with NUPI. I will serve as your moderator today. Together with us, we have three excellent experts to help us. First, we will have Arjen Collage to tell us more about the developments within the EU. Arjen is International Relations Officer at the European Commission's DG Climate Action Klima, where he coordinates DG Klima's engagement with Western European partners, including Norway, and on EEA and Arctic matters. Second up will be Jon Birger Skjærseth. He's a research professor at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute and a political scientist with main research interests within international environmental cooperation, European climate and energy policies, and corporate strategies. Finally, Kasper Sulecki is a research professor in the Climate and Energy Research Group at NUPI. He's a Professor 2 and Fellow in Include as well, University of Oslo, and the main areas of research are the politics of decarbonization, EU energy and climate policy, energy security, and global climate governance. So that means we will have three of the best placed experts available to give us a fresh knowledge on current European regulatory trajectories, including the recently approved 2040 energy and climate targets, Norway's situation, and the challenges of policy coordination across borders. We'll first give the audience the three presentations before we turn to a Q&A session with some discussion between the presenters. Those of you attending this webinar, please feel free to post questions you would like us to pick up using the Q&A function you should find in this meeting. I will do my best to bring these questions to the presenters following this. So, however, first we let the presenters present. First out is Arjen Collage, who will give us more background on how EU is staying the course on climate action together with Norway and despite geopolitical challenges. I'd like to thank you, Arjen, for offering the Commission's perspectives. So the virtual floor is yours, and there you go.
Thank you, and thank you for having me for this very relevant event. So yeah, I'm here to talk a bit about the direction of travel of the European Commission and the EU on this question. And I think my main message that I have come to deliver is that the EU is committed to and staying the course on climate action in this period. I think the EU's track record proves that climate ambition and economic strength go hand in hand, and that's what we want to prove through our policies and regulations. So since 1990, the EU has reduced emissions by 38%, while growing its economy by around 70%. This shows that investing in decarbonization also means investing in energy security, prosperity, and industrial competitiveness, and that's the line we want to pursue. So as I'm sure many, if not all of you are aware, the EU has set binding targets, emission reductions targets for 2030 of at least 55% compared to 1990 levels, and is well on track to achieve this emissions reductions effort and ultimately climate neutrality by 2050 at the latest. So the member states updated NECPs, the National Energy and Climate Plans, which complement EU-level actions, according to the Commission's assessment, show that overall these plans will reduce net emissions by around 54% by 2030 if fully implemented, just shy of the 55% target. So not only are we staying the course, we are on track to achieve our objectives. You talked about the EU Green Deal. Now recently in the EU, we unveiled the Clean Industrial Deal as the new North Star to this Commission mandate. With this proposal, the Commission and the European Union is sending two clear signals. First, we are going all in on decarbonization as a strategy to drive again forward our climate, competitiveness, economic security, and resilience agendas. And second, we're bringing businesses on board to ensure success. So the Clean Industrial Deal will be our compass to drive decarbonization efforts. The main objective is to build a business case for industry more competitive. This will concern many policy areas, ensuring access to affordable clean energy, creating lead markets that generate demand for low carbon products and make them commercially viable, and to help big decarbonization projects get funded. The Clean Industrial Deal will also guide our cooperation efforts with partners that play an important role in green value chains, clean tech, raw materials, and circularity. And I think there is unquestionably clear value in joining forces with our EEA partners, and especially Norway in this context. Moving on to kind of the more granular climate regulatory initiatives. So as you mentioned, over the last few months, we have been in the process of agreeing on our emissions target for 2040 through an amendment to our climate law. Earlier this month, right before COP, the Council of the European Union agreed to a general approach on the amendment of the climate law, setting out a legally binding EU net GHG emissions reduction target of 90% for 2040 compared to 1990, making it one of the most ambitious targets globally. In designing this post-2030 policy framework implementing the target, the Commission is mandated to make proposals that appropriately reflect a contribution of up to 5% of international carbon credit, corresponding to a domestic net target of 85%. And so what this will mean in practice is we will do a thorough impact assessment on quality criteria, price expectations, and modalities of credit usage. And these will be kind of clearly set out in our upcoming legislative proposals. And we will also have a pilot phase already in 2031 to better understand and explore the use of these credits. The agreement also includes some modifications to already existing pieces of legislation, in particular the introduction of ETS2 for buildings, emission trading scheme. For buildings, road transport, and additional sectors will be delayed by 1 year to 2028. Even with this delay on ETS2, member states will remain legally obliged to meet their binding 2030 targets under the effort sharing regulation, ensuring that the EU stays on course to climate neutrality. And that is, of course, relevant because EEA partners, well, Norway and Iceland are included in have transposed the effort sharing regulation. So since this decision at council level, the Parliament has agreed on a report supporting this target. And so now this will go ahead to trilogues, but we already have our level of ambition for 2040, which is established. And so we will move fast to put in place the climate policy framework to enact these targets. And again, that's also very relevant for Norway as an EEA partner. Kind of going a bit more into the toolbox of how that will be enacted. We have different measures planned. As an example, certain aspects of the emission trading schemes are again subject to review to ensure that it contributes to the most cost-efficient manner to the objectives. Such aspect would include permanent carbon removals to the ETS, non-permanent carbon capture and use, maritime and aviation topics, among others. An impact assessment and a legislative proposal on the review of the ETS will be due in the summer of 26. And looking ahead, we're also developing a new industrial decarbonization bank. This will provide 100 billion euros to support the scaling up of clean technologies in industry. Another important element is ensuring accurate data, which relates to the monitoring, reporting, and verification of emissions. And there we are particularly active, again, in the carbon removal space. We are developing methodologies under the carbon removal and carbon farming framework. And we're progressing well and hopes to have these methodologies finalized in the next few months. And these will serve as building blocks for designing policies, incentive schemes, and linking them again to the ETS. This last kind of big theme that we're pursuing in this new mandate will be to step up action on climate resilience. So in March 2024, you may have known, we will, through the European Environmental Agency, issued a pan-European climate risk assessment, and the Commission put forward additional policy proposal on how to address these risks. As one of the key action and under the Preparedness Union strategy we presented, we started to develop an ambitious integrated framework on the European climate and resilience risk management. It will have 3 goals. First, we want to introduce a shared understanding of climate risk ownership and a common climate reference scenario. Secondly, we want to embed the resilience by design principles in all key sectoral policies and in the multi-annual financial framework, the EU budget that's currently under discussion for the post-2027 period. And thirdly, we aim at empowering citizens and businesses by providing tools to access climate hazards and resilience solutions on a single platform. And so this is planned for the end of 2026, and will again kind of be another building block to ensure kind of the success of this European climate agenda in coordination with our objectives of productivity, prosperity, security and well-being, and competitiveness. So in terms of how the international context has influenced this process, I think kind of going through the list of what I've gone through is already kind of answered this question to some extent. Yes, the EU climate policy process is obviously influenced by external process. The EU represents only 6% of global emissions, and so in order to provide comprehensive response to the global climate crisis, we have to also take action on these 94% which are not outside the EU. And so our climate action is described within a global context, most prominently through the multilateral processes we are engaged in, our commitment to the Paris Agreement and to the UNFCCC process. These processes obviously shape the timelines and our actions under which we act. It's not, I think I will not surprise you by saying that, there was pressure on our side to deliver our 2040 target in order to be able to come to Belém with our 2035 NDC. But I do want to emphasize that, in an era of changing politics and growing disinformation around climate science, it is more important than ever that we are able to kind of push through on our core principles in the fight against climate change and not waver, despite, what other major partners, the trajectories that they are on. And so I think kind of our message in terms of the European Commission is that we stay committed to the science, multilateralism, and cooperation with global partners, and in particular the most vulnerable. And in that sense, we remain committed to all the international engagements we've taken over the past years, be it in Dubai, Baku, and more recently Belém, as to accelerating the clean energy transition worldwide, delivering on the global pledges of the transition away from fossil fuels, tripling renewables, and doubling the global rate of energy efficiency by 2030. Now we move on to kind of what's the role of Norway as a partner in all this. I think it's important to kind of reiterate that on our side, we see Norway as a long-standing and reliable partner to the EU, with which we are almost kind of the most aligned in terms of the common vision and objectives we share for building a climate-neutral continent. The EU and Norway's cooperation is centered around the EEA agreement. It provides the basis for Norway's participation in the EU's internal market, and I think in that sense is valued by all parties. Norway has kind of gone further to align its climate objectives with the EU, not only through the EEA agreement. Through the EEA agreement, it has Norway has participated to the EU ETS since 2008 and has adopted, transposed the revised EU ETS, including ETS 2, as of 2024. But Norway and Iceland have, also gone further by agreeing to transpose the effort sharing regulations and the land use change in forestry (LULUCF) regulation back in 2018, committing to align to the pre-Fit for 55 targets to reduce greenhouse emissions by at least 40%. And we are currently in discussions with both of these partners and the EFTA Secretariat to incorporate the revised effort sharing regulation and LULUCF with the Fit for 55 targets within the EEA agreement. Kind of looking beyond the EEA agreement, we have the Green Alliance signed in 2023 by our respective leaders, which has opened a new era of privileged cooperation on climate action, on clean energy, on working towards industrial transformation and environmental protection, with the aim to complement this EEA agreement cooperation. And in that sense, I think we have to kind of continue to work together. We have a good story to tell in terms of working together on green industrial transition. We have a strategic industrial partnership that was signed last year, which gives a good framework to strive towards greater strategic autonomy on critical raw materials in the context of our green transformation. We're working closely together on deploying clean energy, where Norway has significant experience to share with the EU, and we look forward to reinforcing this cooperation closer. And so to conclude, I'll say that the Green Alliance is not only kind of strengthening the bonds between us, but also a strong signal to the international community on our mutual commitment to climate action and environmental protection. We have a shared kind of ambition, not only kind of internally, but also in key international climate and environmental conventions, most notably the Paris Agreement. And so we're looking forward to reinforce this cooperation even further. So yeah, that's it for my initial intervention. The floor is back to you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. It's quite impressive to see all the different initiatives coming from the EU. So that means we will also get to hear a little bit about how that is received from the Norwegian side over different years, not in terms of politics, but in terms of coordinative structures and coordination structures. So the next one out is then Jon Birger Skjærseth. He will give us a presentation on this. But the presentation focuses on the shifting EU-Norway relations and coordination of climate and energy policies over time. So just before we move over to you, Jon Birger, you can make yourself ready to share. share your screen. I'll just remind that we still have the Q&A option available, so please post your questions during the presentations as well as after. The floor is yours, so we can begin.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I will follow up on the last part of what Adrian was talking about, the relationship between Norway and the EU, and focus on the shifts and the changes in EU-Norway relations over the last 15 years or so. Of course, not in detail, but in terms of some snapshots. I will then zoom in on coordination and challenges related to climate and energy policies, as reduction of greenhouse gases affect kind of all sectors of society, all ministries, all agencies. So a kind of coordinated and holistic approach is kind of to solutions is necessary towards net zero by 2050. Okay, so this leaves me with kind of two sections in this presentation. The first on EU-Norway relations, and the second one on policy coordination at the domestic level. And in this section, I will also present some research findings from a recent publication that focuses specifically on coordination of climate and energy policies in Norway. I think I will start with a conclusion to the first part. The main point is that Norway has become increasingly integrated in more ambitious and wider EU climate and energy policies over time. And as Adrian mentioned, the main channel here is the European Economic Area Agreement from 1994. And in addition to that agreement, there's also the bilateral agreement between the EU and Norway from 2019. I will get back to these agreements. What I will do now is to try to give you some of the background for this development. I will start then at the EU level. Adrian mentioned the latest Fit for 55 package, but there has actually been, and that was actually the third climate and energy package produced by the EU. The EU has produced three packages directed towards increasingly stringent targets. And these targets are not only related to greenhouse gas emissions, they're also related to renewable energy consumption and energy saving and energy efficiency. So the first package was concluded in 2009, or at least formalized, and it was directed towards targets in 2020. And we now have the third Fit for 55 package directed towards 2030. Also, as Adrian mentioned, we have the European Green Deal that was launched late fall 2019. That also linked kind of climate and energy policies to wider environmental, societal, and also green industry, green EU industry ambitions, now culminating with the Clean Industrial Deal. Okay, so here is an illustration of the third Fit for 55 package. As you can see, and as we heard, it's directed towards the EU's target of 55% reductions by 2030 compared to 1990 level. And this target also aligns to Norway's 2030 target. The packages have developed towards more and more complex set of policy instruments covering more and more sectors. And as you can see here, this has kind of developed into a web of policies spanning from the EU emissions trading system to the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation, aimed to kind of promote charging stations and clean hydrogen stations along the main transport channels in Europe. So, as I said, two main channels for the integration of Norwegian climate and energy policies with the policies of the EU. the European Economic Area Agreement, the first one, which provides Norway with access to the internal market in exchange for the implementation of EEA relevant legislation. This has served as the basis for different types of energy legislation from the EU, for the emissions trading system. It will be used as a basis for the Fit for 55 package, and it's also a basis for the green industrial and raw material policies coming from the EU. And then we have the bilateral climate agreement with the EU, which is the foundation for the cooperation with the EU on land use and forestry, and also the so-called effort sharing regulation for the non-ETS sectors. This is a bit technical, but it covers sectors like agriculture, transportation, buildings, and waste. At least in my mind, one of the most exciting kind of changes in EU-Norway relations is the widening of scope over time. More and more sectors in Norway have become subject to and included and integrated in EU climate and energy legislation. From 2008, when the petroleum sector and energy-intensive industries were included in the emissions trading system. The latest addition, at least one of the latest additions, are the kind of green industry and raw material pieces of legislation. Last year, the EU adopted the so-called Net Zero Industry Act and the Critical Raw Materials Act, which is also kind of feeding into the clean industrial deal that Adrian was talking about. Norway considers both kind of relevant for the EEA agreement. It has decided to implement the Critical Raw Materials Act, but as far as I understand, there are still some challenges concerning the Net Zero Industry Act related to carbon capture and storage and competence related to the Norwegian continental shelf. Okay, but the main point here is that more and more sectors in Norway have been integrated and included in binding EU policies over time. When the scope expands in terms of sectors that kind of have to contribute to the solutions, the coordination challenges also increase. And one reason for this is a kind of dry and technical concept, but it's called a sectoral principle. It means that the management of any issue is linked to a particular ministry and its subordinated agencies. This is the kind of standard principle for most public administrations, also for the European Commission. And this principle has a very strong standing in Norway. The main advantage with this principle is that it gives kind of a clear division of responsibilities between the different sectors of the administration. It also promotes accountability and allows for specialization. But the drawback is also clear when you have to deal with cross-sectoral problems like climate change, because no one actually takes responsibility for the whole. And in this context, I'm not now getting to our recent research, and I want to present just some result from that research on cross-sectoral coordination in Norway in the context of the EU and the expansion of scope. And of course, this will be very brief. Our first finding is that cross-sectoral coordination efforts in Norway have increased somewhat. It has improved somewhat, even though the challenge also has increased. We have kind of analyzed this when it comes to the knowledge basis, or the production of knowledge as a basis for policy decisions, and also when it comes to climate policy governance. Related to the knowledge basis, there has been a significant increase in the kind of number of public agencies that participate in providing the knowledge basis. It's like when you include the maritime sector, the agencies related to the maritime sector also have to participate. But despite this increase, the cooperation between the agencies has developed from a kind of loose ad hoc and decentralized system to a much more centralized and permanent cooperative body, which, at least according to our interviewees, has also been more effective. When it comes to climate policy governance, there is a new platform, a coordination platform for all the ministry leaders. We don't know whether this is actually working, but it is at least an effort in the right direction. And there is also a new annual climate governance system related to the so-called Green Book. And one element here is that each and every ministry has to kind of assess the implications of state budget changes for emissions of greenhouse gases. This is done in very general terms, and and I guess that it will be further developed and improved. So the first finding in our work is that coordination has increased somewhat, even though the challenge has increased. The kind of next step in this paper is then to try to explain both the small changes, but also the status quo. And we have then focused on kind of drivers and bottlenecks at both the EU and domestic level. To cut a very long and complex story short, the main conclusion here is that the reasons for the change we have seen is due to mixed EU and domestic drivers. The EU clearly has some adaptation pressure on Norway in terms of the policy packages. I know now that Norway, for instance, is lagging when it comes to the LULUCF regulation and also the effort sharing regulation, where the EU is putting some pressure on Norway. But this development is also domestically driven, for instance, by Norway's Climate Change Act. But the kind of main observation we have made is that we haven't seen very much changes, and this is due to what we can call institutional inertia. It's a technical term, but and this is related to the sectoral principle, which is constraining coordination. And this means that if you think about the public administration as a kind of silo system with the ministries and the agencies, they have lack of resources, they have lack of expertise to cooperate. But there are also different cultures that are preventing tighter cooperation, and of course different interests. So these are the kind of main reasons, and of course, because these reasons are partly cultural and institutional, this is kind of hard to change, at least over the short term. Okay, that was it. Two main conclusions. Norway has become increasingly integrated in ever more ambitious and wider EU climate and energy policies. I guess this will continue, but this climate agreement with the EU will expire in 2030. But there are negotiations now, as far as I know, to kind of extend this agreement. And the second conclusion is that cross-sectoral coordination efforts have increased somewhat in Norway, but the sectoral principle and institutional inertia prevail. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you very much yourself, Jon Birger, for that walkthrough of some of the influences of EU policy packages and on Norwegian coordinative structures. Next up is Kasper Sulecki, our final presenter before we enter the Q&A section. He will present on Norway's role in Europe's green transition, the material dimension, energy, critical minerals and batteries that you already see on the screen. So please remember to post questions that you're interested in hearing discussed during the presentation or after. Meanwhile, I'll give the word to you, Kasper.
First, thank you very much to Håkon, and thanks to all the panelists. I'll try to be brief because I would like us to have the opportunity to have the Q&A as long as possible. So I'll try to provide this, yes, exactly the material dimension. Why is Norway important for the EU. Obviously, it's because it possesses certain assets that are actually very valuable and almost vital for Europe's green transition to succeed or to be easier, also in this paradigm of strategic autonomy that has become important after the COVID pandemic, where the EU found that, well, global value chains are subject to certain geo-economic, geostrategic pressures. And it's always better to have someone in your immediate family that can provide a certain key items and yeah. Let me see how. Yeah, this is based on two publications that we had earlier at NUPI, a policy brief. Which was called Norway More Than Just a Petrol Station, and then a report co-authored by me and three young experts in this field, Amalie Larsen, Bendik Larsen, and Philip Godal, on batteries and critical raw materials. So Norway has, as I mentioned, certain key important assets in those areas. Norwegian electricity system is almost entirely decarbonized already, based on hydropower. I don't probably have to explain that to most of the listeners. And additionally, Norway has gained a lot of importance after the invasion of Ukraine, where Norwegian gas, in the immediate term after the invasion, has helped to fill the gap left by Russian gas, which is, well, now almost entirely phased out in terms of pipeline gas. LNG not so much, but that's not the topic here. Norway also possesses, and this is perhaps less known, significant mineral reserves, one of the most important critical mineral reserves in Europe. Some of those minerals are vital for the energy transition and for different technologies, especially renewables, and for grid expansion. However, there are also challenges here. Domestic electricity prices, public opposition to onshore wind, lengthy mining permits, and in general lengthy administrative processes are some key challenges that I'll be talking about today. And also the context is that while the EEA, as we have heard, enables regulatory alignment and creates pressure for regulatory alignment, it doesn't give automatic market integration, especially when it comes to exports from Norway to the EU. And this has been the topic of quite heated debate in the last couple of days in Norway because of the ferroalloys tariffs. Why should Norway strive to be more than just a petrol station? I mean, it is benefiting immensely, some would even say disproportionately, on fossil fuel exports. Well, as Adrian has reminded us, the EU has very clear and strict plans for decarbonization, meaning that fossil fuels in the medium term already will be phased out in the EU. So betting everything on fossil fuel exports would probably leave Norway in a disadvantaged position quite soon. However, Norway also has a different energy asset, which is flexible hydropower, which is perfectly fit to balance renewable energy intermittency across Europe. So the more the EU relies on weather-dependent renewables, the higher the value of this element of the Norwegian electricity system, which is a flexible hydropower. However, here this is a problem, and this might not be so obvious for those who are listening to us from outside Norway. Because of price differences, it has been tempting for Norwegian energy producers, electricity producers, to export electricity not just during peak hours, where the prices are obviously highest, and where it is where Norway can really provide that flexibility, but also outside of peak, simply because electricity outside Norway is more expensive, so you can make more on selling that power also at different times of day. That has actually been an important contributor to driving domestic prices up in Norway. And you have to bear in mind that Norway has the highest household electricity use per capita, one of the highest in Europe. And also the demand elasticity is pretty low, meaning that there is not much that the population can do. So the Norwegian society cannot really react to those price hikes. It has to take the cost in. That has led to quite a lot of resistance towards certain policies of European integration, and that also made EU unpopular in some circles. Also, the expansion of onshore wind has faced some significant public resistance. Tor Håkon has written about that if you're interested, so there's publications also to refer to. And overall, Norway is investing a lot in hydrogen and carbon capture and storage technologies, which the government sees as important innovation and decarbonization strategies. That's it for a short run through the electricity sector. As for critical minerals, Norway has very rich deposits of copper, nickel, cobalt, and graphite, and these are actually ranked as most critical for the energy transition. Some of these, at least. We also had a report at NUPI that has tried to create such a ranking. There has been an increase in exploration licenses in the last year, basically, and Norway's resources are really quite vast. In the report that I presented earlier, we look into 3 mining projects, highlighting both the opportunities and the challenges from around, especially permitting and societal acceptance. An issue that has appeared really on the table in the past 2 years was seabed mining or east seabed mining. I mean, if you look at this just in a very simple terms, if there's a lot of resistance for onshore mining, then perhaps seabed mining should be the easy solution. This is very misleading. So seabed mining has important environmental consequences and has already been challenged by both environmental NGOs and many political parties in the Norwegian parliament. However, this is still under discussion, and there has been a lot of legislative movement around the question of sea mining. Some recent developments, there was a new Minerals Act this year, which has tried to streamline questions related to permitting and also, but also strengthening consent rights of the indigenous Sami people, because a lot of those resources are in the in Norway's far north. There was also a Seabed Minerals Act adopted quite recently, and the Norwegian Offshore Directorate has now stipulated the regulations relating to data collection and documentation of mineral activities and reserves. So it's still not about the actual extraction, but potential research on that. Also, some work environment and safety preparations that will enable this to take place eventually, perhaps. An important thing related to coordination with EU regulation has been exploring the incorporation of the EU Critical Raw Materials Act into the EEA. The Norwegian government has some is generally supportive of this regulation, advocating explicitly for the inclusion of aluminum and graphite, which aligns with Norway's resource portfolio. But the opposition, so the political opposition in Norway, 2 political parties, especially those anti-EU, and also some social movements, have questioned this regulation as, I quote, the most intrusive EU regulation ever proposed. And also NGOs and environmental groups have voiced concern over permit deadlines, which become stricter and more difficult for the civil society to engage with. Now, very quickly, because I would like to have the opportunity to have a discussion. The battery sector is also an area where Norway would like to see its innovation potential realized and its contribution to the European green transition made. Norway would like to develop a full battery chain, including raw materials, components production, and recycling. Some key players have already been moving into that sector and expanding, also with joint EU R&D and not only R&D funding. However, there's important questions related to global competition. EU trade barriers have also been an important question here already before. We have seen that although Norway is a part of the EEA, it's not clear whether, for instance, electric vehicles with Norwegian-made batteries would be treated as external or internal. So there's a lot of details here for lawyers to determine, and also for policymakers to determine. And the ferroalloys case has shown that this is not so easy and not so straightforward. So very quickly, the last things happening, and most recently, there has been quite a lot of movement in this sector, and large battery factories have been opened. But overall, the profitability is still a thing of the future. And there has also been some important changes in the global environment that influence the profitability of this sector. So battery metal demand has grown quite significantly, which is not surprising given the direction the overall green transition around the world is taking. But on the other hand, we've seen a surprising price decline, especially of lithium, of over 80%. Which is reducing some incentives for new mining projects. Lithium is perhaps not the most important material here in Norway, but also some other minerals have seen similar changes. So there's a global investment slowdown and overall production delays across the sector. So just to conclude, yes, Norway is certainly an important partner, as we've heard, for the EU, but there are also certain issues, and Norway is not so. There are important things to consider, which might hinder the potential of Norway to deliver on those things that the EU would perhaps like to see. Some of those things are quite important: environmental and energy justice concerns versus the speed that we need for the energy transition to be implemented. Low prices in the critical minerals sector, deep sea uncertainties, and overall the debate over sovereignty, which is also kind of the flip coin of the debate on EU membership of Norway, something that is perhaps less and less of a taboo, especially after the war in Ukraine has started. Thank you very much for this. This has been a very quick run through. I would like you to refer to the publications if you're interested in more detail.
Thank you very much, Kasper, and thank you very much, all three of you. We have moved through we have covered a lot of terrain here, so that we will have to gather our thoughts a bit. We have first had a discussion and a presentation about the EU's development and trajectories, also towards the end linking it to the relationship to Norway. So Ewan Biger, he presented more on the general relationship between Norway and EU, where we looked into the qualitative structures that sort of the receptors for Norway, and if they have been changing and being changing in alignment with developments in the EU. And Kasper, you presented perhaps a little bit more on the topics or the themes, the more sectorial areas that are points of entry and collaboration between Norway and EU. So in sum, I think we should do we haven't had any questions from the Q&A yet. I'll notify you if and when we do, but I would like to start with a question to all of you, and I think we do this in the same order that we have done the presentations for the same question. So I'll start with you, Arjen. From your perspective, or the Commission's perspective, do you think Norway has been using its full potential for synergies with the EU's green transition? Or to what degree do you see this?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And once again, I think we see Norway as one of the most, if not the most, aligned partner in terms of the green transition and our both domestic and international global goals. And through the kind of cooperation mechanisms that are in place, kind of as we kind of discussed in length, the EEA agreements, which integrates Norway and other EFTA partners, EEA partners in the EU single market, as well as the Green Alliance. I think we have like a breadth of cooperation that, frankly, I don't think we have with any other partners. I mean, of course, there's always kind of room to enhance that coordination, both, as kind of was mentioned, in terms of policy alignment, EEA agreements. We still have to kind of incorporate, a few big chunks of the Fit for 55 package within the EEA agreement. We mentioned kind of most notably the effort sharing, the revised effort sharing regulations and the LULUCF regulations.
So there's a lot there, but where's the main potential for increased collaboration, or where are the challenges? Where is this?
Yeah, I think in terms of kind of going beyond that, again, it's the Green Alliance, and this is a new tool. It's it's 2 years old or a bit more, but it does provide us avenues to kind of cooperate on a range of topics which are outside the scope of this agreement. And I mean, as kind of Casper outlaid, kind of I think for now the main kind of flagship deliverable we've had through this agreement is strategic industrial partnerships and the agreement, the memorandum of understanding for cooperation on critical raw materials. And so I think there is more to be done, but clearly we kind of have the framework to be able to kind of pursue this cooperation deeper, especially as kind of new challenges arises. I think kind of critical raw materials in the end is like becoming even ever more relevant and an ever bigger kind of priority in our transition, for instance.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there's a potential, including but also beyond the EEA agreement, to develop within the Green Alliance area. Jon Birger, you get the same question. I'm wondering when you look at the alignment structures on coordination between the EU, and how do you read the Norwegian responses in terms of the developments there? Same question as for Arjen.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to answer that without looking at the kind of political background, because
please, yeah, no, please be short.
Yeah, as at least the Norwegian knows, there are two major EU skeptical parties at both sides of the kind of both on the blue and the red side of Norwegian politics. And because of the EU opposition in Norway, it's a kind of delicate thing to develop cooperation further with the EU. I think the two main areas now, as you know, there are a lot of energy-related directives and regulations that are still kind of lagging. Norway's implementation, we had a government crisis this winter, in relation to the clean energy package adopted in 2018-2019. And the other aspect, of course, is the extension of the climate agreement with the EU, which will expire in 2030. But as far as I understand, it is a kind of it has been signaled that the present government wants to extend the agreement, and that agreement kind of makes Norway into more or less a full climate policy member of the EU. So if that is extended, I guess that Norway will continue as a climate policy member, and we're lagging on the energy side due to political, different party political differences. Yeah.
Thank you. Also, Kasper, you'll get the same question, but you will get an addition because we have two questions also from the Q&A. And so on the Norway and the potential for synergies to exploit that, I wonder also link that to a question from Oscar here to what is Norway's role or opportunities within climate security with the EU?
So that's for me.
Yeah,
that's a difficult one because, well, climate security is something, at least the way I understand it, is a slightly different concept from what we've been talking about here. I associate climate security primarily with adaptation questions, so we haven't really spoken about this that much. And like more broadly speaking, Norway has been contributing to kind of the global discussion on adaptation, but in the Norway-EU relationship, that hasn't really been so prominent as far as I can tell. If I have misunderstood the question, I would like Oscar to maybe rephrase. As for the potential that Norway has but hasn't really used, I mean, I tried to hint to that already in my presentation. I think that really Norway's role as a provider of clean and flexible electricity is something that is very difficult to, I mean, we shouldn't underestimate this, but of course, I think that many external observers, so people who are not familiar with the Norwegian domestic debate, do not understand the context in which this might be developed or why it's not developed at the speed that we might want to see from a European perspective. That the discussion of additional interconnectors has now basically been blocked by the question of high or growing electricity prices. And that the expansion of additional renewable energy sources, either onshore or offshore, is constrained by a lot of different factors. So while Norway really does have a lot of potential to play a pivotal role in stabilizing the continental energy system in Europe, there are many domestic challenges to that, and if they could be dealt with somehow in a just and efficient way, that would probably be a very big boost for Norway's role overall.
Great. Adrian, the question from Oscar on climate security might be more aligned with what you were talking about earlier as well. You mentioned some of these things. Since we only have 1.5 minutes left, I would just like to add the question, if you can be super quick. I know this is challenging, but if you could reflect a little about the current geopolitical situation that you did refer to, but with the war in Ukraine and trade tensions with US has affected green transition plans in the EU as well. So you get the climate security and geopolitical question.
Thank you. Yeah, I think climate and security is a very relevant question in terms of kind of what we're looking now in terms of priority of the European Commission. Again, kind of as kind of the impacts of climate change become more and more present, especially in the Arctic regions, for instance. This is definitely kind of something that's kind of coming on top of the agenda, and also kind of the stronger geopolitical kind of presence of certain actors in this area. So on our side of the European Commission, we have announced that we will be revising our EU Arctic policy. And so this is kind of one angle, climate and security, which we'll be kind of looking at quite closely. And I think, obviously like-minded partners like Norway or like Canada will be kind of involved in these discussions on this question. The second part of the question relating more to the kind of the geopolitical context, I think, I kind of tried to hint that also in my presentation, but that's kind of something that we've tried to address with the clean industrial deal, kind of putting together decarbonization with also kind of economic security, energy security, competitiveness. And so we're trying to, with these kind of new policy packages, address the consequences of these new geopolitical contexts and ensure kind of resilience of the European Union, both economically, energetically, and also on the transition which we want to like stay the course on again. And again, Norway will be like a major partner in this as like a closely aligned partner.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Adrian and Kasper and Jon Birger. I think that we hear that the EU is doubling down on the green transition plan as a response to geopolitical tensions will be the final word of this. Thank you everyone for giving us this detailed and nuanced picture of the EU and Norway's relationship. And I think with that, we finish this webinar. Thank you for everyone for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.